Hey guys, my name is JC, and today's gameplay video features Hinata Dawn Crown as requested by you. This is a deck that takes advantage of massively cost-reduced X spells to control the board until it can find a finisher to close out the game. So let's see if Hinata can hold her opponents back long enough to take the win. Okay, let's start by having a look at who we're going to be playing, and we have Borborygmos, we have Zetalpa, Primal Dawn, oh that's pretty cool, and we have Jetmir, Nexus of Revels. So let's have a look at our opening hand. I'm not really liking it too much, only 2 lands and no ramp means that if we don't hit our land drop we're going to be in trouble, so we'll definitely mulligan this. That second hand I am liking better. We don't have access to red mana just yet, but I do like having mana drain in our hand, Archmage Emeritus as card draw, so it's a little risky, but hopefully by turn 4 we'll draw into a red source, so we'll keep this one. So Jetmir starts by playing a land, and now they cast a Deafening Silence. Each player can't cast more than 1 non-creature spell each turn. Well, I don't know how much that's going to affect the Borborygmos or Zetalpa player. Probably not a lot. It's probably going to hit us the hardest there. On the other hand, our spells tend to be pretty big impact, so even if we are only casting 1 a turn, we should still get a pretty strong effect from it. And that's their turn done. We draw an Inscription of Insight. Well, at the very least we have card draw online straight away if we need to find our land, so we'll just start by playing our Sea of Clouds, and we'll pass the turn. Borborygmos plays a land, and that's it for them. Zetalpa plays their land for turn, and that's also it for them. Jetmir plays a land, and they have it come into play untapped, so they lose 2 life. And now they cast a Drannith Magistrate. Well, that's pretty bad for us. Opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands, so we're seeing a very stacksy build of Jetmir here. But otherwise they leave the turn there. We draw an Eerie Interlude. So I think all we'll do is we'll play our island and we'll sit back on our mana drain. And that's our turn done. Borborygmos plays a land. And now they cast a Cryptolith Rite, so creatures they control basically tap for 1 mana of any colour. And that's it for them. Zetalpa plays a land. And now they cast an Ambitious Farmhand. When it ETBs, they can search their library for a basic Plains card, reveal it, put it into their hand, and then shuffle. And they end the turn there. Jetmir plays a land. And now they cast a Rule of Law. Each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn. Well, I think we're going to have enough trouble trying to remove at least one of those permanents, so I think we will use the mana drain here. Normally I'd like to hold on to it a little bit longer, but we do need to start progressing our game plan, and we are a commander-centric deck, so if we don't get our commander down, we're not doing a lot. Or at least not as much as we'd like. So we'll mana drain that, and at least we'll have some extra mana for our next turn. We'll probably get hit by the Drannith Magistrate for doing that, and we do. So we'll take the damage, and that's their turn done. We draw a Mana Form Hellkite for turn, so we'll get our 3 colourless mana from the mana drain. And what I actually think we'll do here is get down our Orvar. That way if there's any removal in any of the players' hands, I'm happy for Orvar to go down at the moment because he's not too useful at the moment. But if we do end up surviving long enough, or he survives, and we get enough lands to cast Archmage Emeritus, we can start using Eerie Interlude, even possibly our own Inscription of Insight to start copying and drawing a lot of cards, finding any answers to problems that come down on the board. So we'll just leave our turn there. And also mistakenly forget to play our land for turn as well. Don't forget to play your lands, guys, that's always important. Like Borborygmos just did then, they played their land for turn. And now they cast a Professional Facebreaker. It's got Menace. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token, and you can sack those treasures to exile the top card of your library, and you can play that card this turn. And that's it for Borborygmos. Zetalpa plays a land, and now they cast Inspiring Overseer. When it ETBs, they gain 1 life and draw a card. And that's their turn done. Jetmir plays a land, and now they cast Barlagad Recovery, targeting their Rule of Law so they can return that card to their hand. So it looks like the Rule of Law is going to stay. We're not going to be able to stop that at the moment. They just pass through combat, and it looks like they're leaving the turn there. So let's remember to play our land this turn. And fortunately we didn't get punished. Well, I think what we need to do is draw cards here. So even though Rhystic Study is certainly not going to be as powerful under a Deafening Silence and soon to be Rule of Law, we'll definitely get it down here. And then we're going to keep Orvar up as a blocker to deter some of our opponents from swinging in at us. Borborygmos plays a Temple of the False God, which isn't currently active because they don't have 5 or more lands at the moment. Now they cast a Burnished Heart, and it looks like they're not going to be able to pay for it, so we will draw a card from that. And we draw a Metallurgic Summonings. That will be good in the later game, but not right now. So Burnished Heart will go through. Now, Borborygmos can hit us or the Jetmir player at the moment because Professional Facebreaker does have Menace. So let's see where they go. And they're going over toward Jetmir's way. They can't block it, so they'll have to take the damage. That triggers Facebreaker, so they're going to make a treasure token now. And that's their turn done. Zetalpa plays a land. And now they cast a Wall of Omens, which does have an ETB trigger so they can draw a card. They pay for Rhystic Study. So now they draw themselves a card and go back up to 7 in hand. It looks like they are going to combat. They do have a flyer, so they have free choice about who they want to hit here. And it looks like they're taking their time considering it. But they finally move through combat and decide not to attack, and they leave it there. Jetmir plays a land for turn. And it's a Cabaretti Courtyard, so it will sacrifice itself when it ETBs. So they'll just search themselves up a land. And now they cast their Rule of Law. Okay, so we draw an Adakar Waste for turn. Now, with those two enchantments, Deafening Silence and Rule of Law on the board, it means we're going to be in a grindy game. But this deck can grind pretty well if it needs to, so I think we're ready to do it. I think we can put up a good fight, so we'll start by playing our land for turn. Luckily, the Drannith Magistrate makes not having a red source moot for casting our commander. So I would like to try to draw some additional cards, just in case Rhystic Study gets removed, or really, I mean, having extra cards is never a bad thing, so I think we'll start by casting our Archmage Emeritus. That way, at least it gives our opponents 2 pieces they need to remove if they want to get rid of our card draw. And that will hopefully draw us into some red sources so we can also cast this Mana Form Hellkite, because that's going to be able to put a good amount of combat pressure on the board. But otherwise, I think we're just going to leave it there. But we are definitely going to be feeling really good if Orvar sticks around and we can Eerie Interlude our Archmage Emeritus to start drawing a bunch of cards. Now, the Borborygmos player does have enough mana here to cast their commander, so let's see if that's what they decide to do. Nope, so they just sacrificed the Burnished Heart, deciding to tutor up 2 basic lands to the battlefield tapped. That does turn their Temple of False Gods online now. And then they cast an Agitator Ant. At the beginning of your end step, each player may put 2/1/1 counters on a creature they control. Goad each creature that had counters put on it this way. That does trigger our Rhystic Study. They decide not to pay, so we'll draw a card. And Blatant Thievery, that would have been a great card to have in our hand if we could get our commander down. But that's okay, even if we have to hard cast it, it's still a great card. So the Ant comes down. Now they move to combat. They swing in once again at the Jetmir player. So they won't be able to do anything about that. The damage is going to go through and that will make them a treasure token. And now Agitator Ant triggers. And we will put the counters on our Orvar here just in case this game does get grindy, which it looks like it's going to be. We might need a really good blocker here, especially when Borborygmos comes down. And that's their turn done. Zetalpa plays a land. And it is a scavenger ground, so they do have some graveyard hate on board. Now they move to combat. They do have a goaded creature themselves. And they're swinging it in our way. We can't block it, so we'll have to take the damage. Now they cast a Swords to Plowshares targeting our Orvar. So they're certainly concerned about Orvar and some tricky shenanigans he's going to be able to do. We can't do anything about that, so he will go, but we'll gain 5 life from that, so we're back up to our starting life total. But it looks like that's it for Zetalpa. Jetmir plays a land for turn. And now they cast a Toski, Bearer of Secrets. So this spell can't be countered, it's indestructible, it attacks each combat if able, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. They did pay for Rhystic Study. Now they just pass through combat because there was no good attacks for them, and they leave the turn there. So we draw a Volcanic Offering for turn, unfortunately one of our red cards, and we haven't drawn a land just yet. Now we could hold up Call of the Coppercoats to put some bodies on board, just in case things get a little bit crazy, because there certainly are some creatures coming down on board, but to be honest, I don't want to miss our land drops, because every turn that goes by that we miss a land drop, we're getting further and further behind, especially without our commander, so I am going to attempt to cast our Inscription of Insight here. That's going to draw us a card off Archmage Emeritus, and hopefully we can scry through and draw something better. So we draw a Talisman of Progress, and that does resolve, so we have a Meteor Blast there, which is a really good card, especially with the way the board state's developing, but we just can't use it at the moment, so we'll put that on the bottom. And we'll keep the Hallowed Fountain on top. And there's our red source, thankfully. So let's put that into play. We're just going to move through combat. And we're going to end our turn there. Now, we will have to go to discard. At the moment, until we draw our red source, I just don't think we can use Mana Form Hellkite, unfortunately. And we do have a win con in hand in the form of Metallurgic Summoning, so we'll put that into our graveyard. So it looks like we're going to see the commander come down here. No, they cast Old Gnawbone. Whoa, that is a big bomb creature. Flying, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. That is a very strong card to come down. And that triggers Rhystic Study, but they pay for it. And it certainly seems like if this thing sticks around, they're going to have more than enough mana to be able to pay for every Rhystic Study that they have to come through. Unfortunately, it also looks like we're probably going to be the ones being attacked here. No, they actually swing in at Jetmir. Well, it's likely the Jetmir player won't block because they won't want to lose their Drannith Magistrate. So it's still a good attack on them anyway. The damage goes through. So now Facebreaker and Old Gnawbone trigger. So that's going to be 5 treasures in total they make. Which means they do have enough mana now to cast their commander if they want to. They also have access to card advantage through Facebreaker as well. So they're in a really strong position at the moment, Borborygmos. But they move to their end step, the Ant triggers. We're not going to accept this time because as much as we don't want to use Archmage Emeritus as a blocker, we may have to soon. Now Borborygmos does put 2 counters on their Old Gnawbone, making it a 9/9. It looks like the Inspiring Overseer also gets a buff. We won't put counters on our creature. It looks like Drannith Magistrate also got the buff, so we were the only ones that opted not to do it this time around. So this Blatant Thievery in our hand is starting to look better and better. If we can manage to snag Drannith Magistrate, Zetalpa when it gets cast, and Old Gnawbone, we're going to be able to really turn this game around quickly. So it looks like Zetalpa's just moving straight to combat, and they're swinging in at us once again. We will take the damage. Now they decide to transform their Ambitious Farmhand. So now it's a 3/3 with lifelink, and that is their turn done. Jetmir plays a land for turn, and now they cast their commander, Jetmir Nexus of Revels. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and have Vigilance as long as you control 3 or more creatures, +1/+0 and Trample as long as you have 6 or more, and they get +1/+0 and Double Strike as long as you have 9 or more. So it's like a mini Crater Hoof Behemoth, or at least that's what a lot of people compare it to. So now they move straight to combat, and I have a feeling our life total is going to get just that little bit lower now. And so we are receiving both the Drannith Magistrate and the little squirrel coming our way. We will just take it because we need to draw cards, and people have been playing quite responsibly with Rhystic Study, so we haven't been drawing much. Toski triggers twice, so they'll be able to draw 2 cards here. But otherwise, they leave the turn there. We draw an Arcane Signet for turn. So I think what we'll do is we'll start by playing our Hallowed Fountain for turn. We'll have it come into play untapped. We'll get down our Arcane Signet. But unfortunately, that's all we're going to be able to do this turn because we have the Rule of Laws out, so we won't be able to do too much else. So we'll just leave the turn there, and then hopefully on the end step we can pop this Volcanic Offering, take out the Drannith Magistrate, and be able to cast our commander next turn. So now Borborygmos starts by casting a Contagion Engine. When it ETBs, put a -1 counter on each creature target player controls, and you can pay 4, tap it, proliferate, then proliferate again. Now they do pay for Rhystic Study. Now we'll see who they target here, and they do target the Jetmir player, so that will get rid of Toski and their source of card draw. Now they tap their Contagion Engine to proliferate and then proliferate again. So they're definitely trying to reduce the size down of Jetmir's creatures. It also allows them to add counters to the creatures they already have there. So when they do hit in for damage with the big bad Old Gnawbone, they're going to make a lot more treasure tokens. Now they do move to combat. We just have to really hope that they don't swing over our way, because we're going to be in quite a bit of trouble if they do. And unfortunately, they are swinging Old Gnawbone our way and the Professional Facebreaker. Now that will be, it looks like 17 damage in total, so we're going to go quite low in life here. Now the question is, do we pop the Volcanic Offering to try to reduce some of that damage from the Facebreaker? It does mean that Drannith Magistrate survives and we're not going to be able to get our commander out, but if our life total is that low, we might not just survive the game either. Look, I think the other players, they are showing that they're a little concerned with our decks, so unfortunately I think we are going to have to go for it here. So we'll also take out their Temple of the False God, and then we're going to choose the Zetalpa player here to actually target the other land and creature. So it looks like they're targeting the Temple Garden from the Jetmir player. I don't see them targeting the Drannith Magistrate, just because it's holding us back. Yes, it's holding them back, but I think they're pretty concerned with us at the moment, at least until our life total gets pretty low or we're out of the game. Just comes with the territory of playing one of those commanders that people are justifiably afraid of. And it looks like they are actually targeting the Drannith Magistrate, so that's actually helped us out quite a bit. And you can see there where sometimes Volcanic Offering can be a really great card, and the fact that it hits multiple things that you want to. And we draw into a Mavinda, so some recursion from the graveyard. So that goes through. So now we're only taking 11 damage, thankfully. Still a big hit, but it gives us a bit more time to survive. Now notably, what's really important there with taking out the Facebreaker is even though Borborygmos has access to all these treasures, they don't have the card advantage now to go with it. So I think that was a really big play for us there in the positive direction. Still, it is 11 treasures and 4 cards in hand. They only need one of those cards to be card advantage for them to start getting really, really far ahead. Agitator Ant triggers on the end step. Once again, I'm going to say no. And that is their turn done. Zetalpa plays a land for turn. And now they move straight to combat. And they're sending both their creatures in towards us. So definitely still afraid of what we potentially can do. I think we actually have to block here, unfortunately, because our life total is just getting too low. But they are just leaving the turn there. So Jetmir plays a land for turn. Now they move straight to combat. They do swing in towards our way. So we will have to take 5 damage here. So we go down to 4. Now they cast a Birthing Pod, paying for the Rhystic Study. 1 and a green Phyrexian, tap, sack a creature, search your library for a creature card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrificed creature's mana value, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Activate only as a sorcery. And it looks like they're going to immediately activate it. They've sacrificed their commander. And now they put a Karmic Guide into play. So when it ETBs, they can return target creature card from their graveyard to the battlefield, and they are going for Drannith Magistrate here. So Jetmir is definitely trying to keep the rest of the table off from casting their commanders. And it looks like they're leaving the turn there. Now, it's not really looking good for us, guys. Being on 4 life, we have to be really careful in how we choose our targets here. Now, the play definitely has to be Blatant Thievery. I mean, the rest of the players at the table have definitely shown that they want to take us out of the game ASAP. Now, the fact some of these creatures are tapped down is unfortunate because it means we can't use them as blockers even if we steal them. Zetalpa's Flyer, we definitely have to take that because either way, if we don't take that, we're dead. We probably want to try to take the Drannith Magistrate here. We can probably take at least 1 hit from that, and we'll take the Old Gnawbone now. Taking that does mean that we will have a blocker up. It will have to die though. So I think that's probably our best option. I mean, truth be told, I think we're not going to be long for this world, but we're going to fight through to the very end, so let's give it a go. So we'll target Old Gnawbone, the Flyer, and the Drannith Magistrate. We'll get our blue mana. Now, we do have a response from the Zetalpa player. They do actually cast Rebuff the Wicked, counter target spell that targets a permanent you control. So unfortunately, I was feeling pretty confident having that go through, but sometimes you just don't know what a player is going to have, especially in mono white. You can never underestimate it. Never discount the mana tithe or something similar. So unfortunately, that's definitely going to be us done. I had a little bit of hope we could get through it, but unfortunately, we are definitely going to crumble to the hate this game, that's for sure. So we will just have to pass the turn here and probably die to a big hit from an Old Gnawbone and an Agitated Ant. So it looks like Borborygmos just moved straight to combat. They're not messing around. And so they send the Ant our way. And now they're sending Old Gnawbone toward the Jetmir player. It looks like Jetmir is just letting the damage through. Now Zetalpa in response activates their Mystifying Maze. Exile target attacking creature and opponent controls. At the beginning of the next end step, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. And they are targeting the Old Gnawbone there. So that will prevent the damage and the treasures from being made. Unfortunately, the Ant still goes through, so we're out of the game. So we go down there. Now Borborygmos cuts Mimic Vat. So now whenever a creature dies, they can imprint it under it, and for 3 mana, they can tap it and make a copy of it. It gets exiled at the beginning of the next end step. Old Gnawbone returns to the battlefield, and now Agitator Ant triggers on the end step. So I'll see if any of the players want to put the counters on the creatures. Looks like Zetalpa did do so on their Seasoned Cathar, and Jetmir decided not to. Now they're just moving straight to combat. They're sending in their Seasoned Cathar over at Jetmir, and their Inspiring Overseer over at Borborygmos. And that is it for their turn. Karmic Guide triggers on Jetmir's upkeep, and it looks like they are paying the Echo cost to keep it around. Now Jetmir plays a land for turn. Now it looks like they're activating their Birthing Pod, so we might see the Karmic Guide get sacrificed here, and we do. That does trigger Mimic Vat, so Borborygmos is going to be able to imprint that underneath if they want to, and they do. And looking at their graveyard, they will be able to get their Professional Facebreaker back. And now it looks like Jetmir puts into play a Kadama of the East Tree. Well, that's a very powerful card, just in any deck that can run green. So now anytime any permanent ETBs, they're going to be able to put another permanent with equal or lesser mana value onto the battlefield. But they don't have a lot of cards in hand at the moment, or ways of getting cards, unless of course they use their Birthing Pod to somehow sacrifice their way up to a card advantage creature. Now they just cast a 3 visits. And in response, it looks like Borborygmos is activating their Mimic Vat. And yep, it looks like Karmic Guide is bringing back the Professional Facebreaker. So now that they have got the Facebreaker back, my money's definitely on the Borborygmos player. Just with the amount of treasures they have, they're going to be able to get a lot of card advantage out of Professional Facebreaker. And I think with the way the rest of the board is looking, Zetalpa does have a lot of cards in hand, but yeah, I just think Borborygmos is going to be able to race ahead here. Unless, of course, there's a board wipe that comes down, but Borborygmos is going to be able to do their thing this turn. They still won't be able to cast their commander because of the Drannith Magistrate, but they have access to a lot of cards and a lot of mana, and any deck that does that is always in a really dangerous position. So I think the Jetmir player may come to regret actually sacrificing that Karmic Guide. So now Borborygmos starts by casting a Glittermonger. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color or tap it to make a treasure token. Now they move to combat. Looks like the Ant's going towards Zetalpa. Old Norbone's going towards Jetmir, and it looks like Facebreaker's also going towards Zetalpa. Moving to blocks, it looks like the Wall of Omens is blocking the Ant. Now in response, they activate Mystifying Maze on the professional Facebreaker. And it looks like in response to that, Borborygmos is activating their Contagion engine to proliferate and then proliferate again. So they've made their Ant and Old Norbone bigger. So the Wall of Omens goes down here. And the damage goes through, so Jetmir is only on 5 life, so their life total's getting precarious here as well. So now Borborygmos makes 11 treasures off Old Norbone. Now the Facebreaker returns on end step, and Agitator Ant also triggers. So now we move to Zetalpa's turn. They cast a Knight of the White Orchid, just ramping a little bit, getting the planes onto the battlefield. Now they just move straight to combat, and they're swinging their Seasoned Cathar in at the Jetmir player. And they're sending their Inspiring Overseer over at Borborygmos. It is a flyer, so they'll be able to get through with damage. Now Jetmir will be forced to block here, and they are using the Drannith Magistrate to block. So that is going to unlock the Borborygmos and Zetalpa players' commanders from being able to come out now. So it looks like in response we have some treasures being sacked by the Borborygmos player. And they activate their Mimic Vat, putting a Wall of Omens into play. So they must have gotten rid of their Karmic Guide underneath it and put the Wall of Omens into play instead. The Wall of Omens leaves on the end step, and now we move to the Jetmir player's turn. The Jetmir player starts by casting Jaxus the Troublemaker. You can pay a red, discard a card, create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control. It gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step, activate only as a sorcery, and it has Blitz. So you can cast this commander for 2 mana, it gains haste, and when it dies, draw a card, sack it at the beginning of the next end step. Now it does trigger Kadama, and off Kadama they put an Aether Vial into play. Now they sacrifice their Jaxus to the Birthing Pod. That does trigger Mimic Vat, and they actually decide to take the Jaxus. Let's see what Jetmir gets here. They're going to need something good because their life total is low enough that they're probably not going to survive the next turn. And they get an Urabrask Heretic Praetor. Well, I don't think that's going to do the job for them, unfortunately. And now they cast a Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker. Well, that is a combo piece. You can tap, create a token that's a copy of target non-legendary creature you control, except it has haste, sack it at the beginning of the next end step. Well, now they move to combat. They're sending in Kadama over at the Borborygmos player. They're also sending Urabrask, and they're sending Kiki Jiki as well. So I think they've seen the writing on the wall, and they're just going out in a blaze of glory, which we almost did if it wasn't for that pesky white counterspell. So it looks like we're going to have a 1v1 between Borborygmos and Zetalpa. And my money's definitely still on Borborygmos here, just while they have that professional Facebreaker out. But it looks like they actually retract their attackers, and now they've changed it towards the Zetalpa player. So there must have been a deal made in chat, which might keep them alive. I don't know how well that's going to work, but we'll soon wait and see. They decide to block the Kiki Jiki with their Knight of the White Orchid. That does trigger Mimic Vat, but that's going to be real no use to the Borborygmos player at all, having no planes in their deck. And they leave the turn there. So Urabrask does trigger on the upkeep. So now instead of drawing a card, they just exile it, and they can only play that card until end of turn. And they exile a Handwear Battlements. Now they play a land for turn. And now we see Borborygmos finally come into play. A 6/7 trample, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. Now they use their Handwear Battlements to give Borborygmos haste until end of turn. And they're moving to combat. So Borborygmos goes towards Zetalpa. So does Professional Facebreaker, Old Norbone, and Agitator Ant. So the Borborygmos players certainly got their eyes on Zetalpa now. It looks like they're activating their Mystifying Maze on Old Norbone again. So it'll be out of combat and it won't generate the treasure tokens. It looks like they're activating their Contagion engine here. And they do, so they proliferate twice. And they are just selecting all their creatures to buff them up. That goes through, so Old Norbone's gone until end of turn. It looks like they block the Ant with the Knight of the White Orchid. So now Professional Facebreaker, Borborygmos, and Mimic Vat trigger. So Borborygmos is going to put a 1/1 counter on each of their creatures. And they also made another treasure token. So now Zetalpa's definitely got a commander damage clock on their hands, but that Mystifying Maze is certainly going to help them stay alive longer than what they otherwise would. Agitator Ant also triggers. Now we move to Zetalpa's turn. Urabrask triggers on their upkeep. And we see them exile an Elspeth Sun's Champion. Well, that is definitely the card they needed to see, especially with that Neg 3 ability to be able to destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater. So this might have just turned around for the Zetalpa player. They move straight to combat, sending in their Seasoned Cathar at the Jetmir player. So they're looking to take them out of the game because I think they feel that they can definitely turn it around here, which may very well be the case. So I think this is the end of the Jetmir player here. So there seems to be some negotiation going on in chat, and that's why we're sitting here on the block-in stage. But I don't know how lucky they are to be able to survive a second time through negotiations. I think they might be done here. And it looks like the Borborygmos player has a response. They're activating Mimic Vat, making a copy of Jaxus the Troublemaker. So we finally move to the damage step now, and that is the end of the Jetmir player. So now it's just 1v1. So we move to Zetalpa's second main phase, and it's very likely that we see Elspeth come down here and clear the board. But they actually move to their end step. That's interesting, so they don't get a chance to cast Elspeth now. Well, they must have a good reason for that. I mean, they do have 6 cards in hand, so we'll see what happens. So Borborygmos plays a land for turn. Now they cast a Ruby Medallion. Red spells cost 1 less to cast. And they follow that up with a Hoarding Ogre. Whenever it attacks, roll a d20. 1 to 9, you create a treasure token. 10 to 19, you make 2. And if you hit the natty 20, you can make 3 treasure tokens. Now they use the Handwear Battlements to give the Ogre haste. Now they move into combat. It'll be interesting to see where the Zetalpa player puts the Mystifying Maze, but they actually cast a Rout instead. You may cast it as though it had flash if you pay 2 more to cast it. Destroy all creatures, they can't be regenerated. Okay, well now we see why they didn't use their Elspeth. They didn't need to. In response, it looks like they make a treasure token using the Glittermonger. Now they are finally activating their Professional Facebreaker here using the treasures. They're also tapping their creatures down for mana. So this is definitely the time where they need to use their Professional Facebreaker, but again, they don't do it. So unfortunately, missing out on a lot of card advantage there. But Mimic Vat does trigger, so they will be able to imprint one of those creatures back underneath it. Let's see which one they pick. And they decide on Old Gnawbone. Well, I definitely think Facebreaker had to be the pick there, really. Old Gnawbone's generating a lot of mana, but that's about it at the moment. They really need card advantage here to make use of all that mana and get themselves back in the game, because the Zetalpa player has 5 cards in hand, so it's going to make it a lot harder for them now. So we move out of combat and we go to their second main phase. Okay, so it looks like we're seeing treasures being cracked here. We might see their commander come back down. No, they actually cast a Stuffy Doll out of exile, which must have been the card that they exiled using their Professional Facebreaker. So now we move to Zetalpa's turn, and I think this is the turn we see their commander come down. And it is Zetalpa Primal Dawn, a 4/8 with flying, double strike, vigilance, trample, and indestructible. So now we move back to the Borborygmos player's turn. They are starting by cracking some treasures here. And now they cast a Nyx Bloom Ancient. So if they tap a permanent for mana, instead it produces 3 times as much of that mana instead. So they've got access to all the mana in the world, but the card advantage is what they really need if they're going to be able to survive through this. All the mana in the world doesn't do anything if you don't have the cards to be able to use them on. So they just start by recasting their commander. And it does come in as a 12/13. Now they do give their commander haste here. And now they cast a Darksteel Plate. So that was the final card in their hand. So they are going to be able to give their commander indestructible. Now they also activate their Mimic Vat to make a copy of Old Gnawbone with haste. Now it looks like they're also activating their Contagion Engine to add more counters to their commander. So that should make it a 14/15. And it is a 14/15. So now they move into combat with Borborygmos and their Old Gnawbone. So they block with their commander Zetalpa. And it's definitely blocking the commander here, because otherwise it would be lethal. So that damage goes through. They go up to 15 commander damage and their life goes down to 35. So that will trigger Old Gnawbone and Borborygmos. So they make a bunch of treasure tokens. But they just move straight to their end step because they have no cards in hand. So they're not able to do anything else. And now we move to the Zetalpa player's turn. They play a land for turn. Now they cast a Solid Footing targeting their commander. Okay, well I think the Borborygmos player just probably saw enough there. They saw the writing on the wall and saw it was over. Well, let's go to the review and discuss that game. So if you saw the last Hinata video, you'll know that it was Drannith Magistrate that was key in preventing us from winning the game. Well, it looks like history is repeating itself once again. But we also ran into some other problems also. Our creature board state was relatively lackluster, and when we couldn't stop the significant combat damage that was consistently coming in towards us, there wasn't much we could do to save ourselves. I will say though, I would have loved if that Blatant Thievery had resolved, because if it had, in our underdog position, I think we could have really swung the game around in our favour. But as we learnt in that game, never underestimate a non-blue deck's ability to interact on the stack. Jetmir did a really good job of locking down the board with stacks pieces, but that was about it because they never really developed their board state enough where they could take advantage of their commander. And once we were out of the game, the other 2 players were so far ahead creature-wise that combat damage was enough to take the Jetmir player out. The Borborygmos player had some very strong value engines on board, and we really got to see the power of Professional Facebreaker and Old Gnawbone in action. In fact, I think they were set up to take the game towards the end, but not using Professional Facebreaker's ability to gain card advantage over the Zetalpa player is what cost them the game in the end. Speaking of Zetalpa, they were able to steadily accrue advantage without any interaction really being pointed their way through most of the game. In fact, they spent most of their early to mid game keeping us in check, and once we were out of the game, they were able to take advantage of the Jetmir player's low life total and the Borborygmos player's lack of card advantage to take the game. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this relook into Hinata and the fear she inspires in her opponents. Until next time, guys.